In the year 1211, an emperor decided to find out what language God spoke. To do it, he took a group of newborn babies away from their mothers, handed them to silent nurses, and gave one rule: feed them, bathe them, keep them alive, but never, under any circumstances, speak a single word to them. He believed that if no one taught these babies a language, they would eventually start speaking the original one, the language of Eden, the language humans were born knowing before culture corrupted them. He thought he would hear Hebrew or Greek or Latin. What he heard instead was nothing, and then one by one the babies began to die. The emperor was Frederick II, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire and one of the most powerful men in 13th century Europe. He spoke 6 languages himself. He kept a personal zoo of giraffes and elephants. He argued with the Pope and got excommunicated for it. Twice, he was by every account brilliant, ruthless, and obsessed with questions other rulers were too afraid to ask. The story of his experiment comes down to us through a Franciscan friar named Salimbene de Adam, who wrote about it around 1282. Salimbene was not a fan of Frederick. He called the experiment foolish, but he was a careful chronicler, and historians still take his account seriously. According to Salimbene, the babies were given everything a body needs: milk, warmth, clean swaddling. The nurses were instructed to handle them gently, but in complete silence. No lullabies, no cooing, no words. The experiment ran for as long as the children lived. None of them lived long. Salimbene wrote a single sentence about the result that has haunted developmental psychology for 800 years. He said, "The children could not survive without the clappings of the hands and the gestures and the gladsome countenances and the blandishments of their nurses." In other words, without speech, without affection, without the ordinary noise of being loved. Babies don't just need food and shelter. They need language poured over them even before they can understand a word of it. Frederick wanted to discover the original tongue of humanity. What he discovered instead was that you cannot raise a human being in silence. The body keeps breathing. Something else stops. For centuries, this was just a strange historical anecdote, a cruel little footnote about a king who went too far. Then in the 20th century, science began to catch up to what Salimbene had described, and the picture got much darker. In the 1940s, a researcher named René Spitz studied infants in 2 institutions. The first was a foundling home where babies were kept clean and fed, but rarely held or spoken to. There weren't enough nurses. Each child got a few minutes of human contact a day. The second was a prison nursery where the mothers were inmates but allowed to care for their own babies, talking to them, holding them, playing with them. The physical conditions in the prison were worse, less hygienic, less medical care. By every measurable term standard of the time, the foundling home should have produced healthier babies. The opposite happened. In the foundling home, infants began to develop normally for the first few months. Then they started to deteriorate. They stopped reaching for objects. They stopped vocalizing. They stopped tracking faces with their eyes. By age 2, more than a third of them were dead. The survivors couldn't walk, couldn't talk, and many couldn't even sit up. Spitz called the condition hospitalism. The babies had everything a body needs, and they were starving anyway. What Frederick had found in 1211 was not an aberration. It was a rule. But there is another version of the same experiment, one that history did not stage on purpose. In 1970, a social worker in Los Angeles County met a girl named Genie. Genie was 13 years old, and she had spent almost her entire life strapped to a child's potty chair in a back bedroom. Her father did not allow anyone to speak to her. He barked at her. He beat her if she made noise. For more than a decade, no one had said a sentence in her presence. When she was discovered, she could not stand upright. She could not chew solid food. She made almost no sound, and she had no language. Linguists rushed to study her because Genie was, in a horrible accidental way, the experiment Frederick had attempted. A human being raised without speech into adolescence. They wanted to know if she could still learn. The answer, it turned out, was complicated. Genie learned vocabulary quickly. Within a few years she had thousands of words. But she never learned grammar. She could say applesauce by store, but never, "Mom, can we go to the store and buy applesauce?" The structure of language, the part of it that lets you assemble new thoughts you've never said before, was gone. She had missed the window. Linguists call it the critical period. Somewhere between birth and roughly age 7, the human brain is wired to absorb language with almost no effort. A toddler in a Spanish-speaking household becomes fluent in Spanish without anyone teaching them. A child raised between 2 languages becomes fluent in both. The neural circuitry is open. almost begging for input, and then it closes. After that window, language is something you have to study. After it, you can learn vocabulary, but the deeper architecture, the rhythm of grammar, the music of native speech, becomes nearly impossible to install. Frederick's babies never made it to that window. Genie passed it alone. And here is where the story gets stranger, because language turns out to be doing more than we ever realized. It is not just a tool for communicating with other people. It is the scaffolding your inner life is built on. In the 1990s, psychologist Susan Schaller worked with a 27-year-old man named Ildefonso. Ildefonso was deaf, and he had grown up in rural Mexico without ever being exposed to sign language. By his 20s, he had no language at all, not spoken, not signed, not written. Schaller spent months trying to teach him that things have names. The breakthrough, when it came, undid him. He sat in her classroom and wept. Later, when he could finally communicate, he tried to describe what those years had been like, and he could not. He said the time before language was a kind of fog. He could not remember it the way you remember things, because there had been no words to lay the memories down with. He had been alive, but he had not been able to think about being alive. Without language, there is no narrator inside your head. No before, no after. Just the moment you are in, fading the second it passes. This is what Frederick was actually trying to take from those babies, though he didn't know it. He thought he was stripping away culture to find the human underneath. But the human underneath does not exist. There is no pre-cultural self waiting to emerge if you just remove the noise. The noise is the self. The lullabies, the half-finished sentences, the way your mother said your name when she was tired, the words for hunger and for love that someone poured into your ears before you could understand any of them. That is what built the person reading this right now. A baby raised in silence is not a purer human. It is a human that never gets to start. Frederick died in 1250, still searching for the original language. He never found it. There is no original language. There is only the one your people were speaking when you arrived, and the version of you it built. 800 years later, his experiment keeps proving the same thing. Take away the words and the body keeps breathing for a while, but the person never quite shows up. We are not born human. We are talked into it.